Hello, I'm Mr. Jeremy. My son brought his arrogant friend into my mansion, and that's where everything changed. He thought he could use me, manipulate me, but I wasn't having it. I froze his credit card and watched him crumble under the weight of his own entitlement. I had to teach him a lesson, but what happened next was far worse than anything I could have imagined. Now, my family is torn apart. Was it worth it? Was the cost of justice too high? You won't believe what I did next. It was a quiet Tuesday morning when I found myself sitting by the large window in my living room, the ocean visible just beyond the glass. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a soft golden light over the waves crashing against the rocks below. The only sound was the rhythmic hum of the waves and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. I was at peace, at least for the moment. I'm Jeremy, a man in my late 60s who's worked his entire life to get to this point. After years of climbing the corporate ladder, pushing myself to the brink, I'd finally retired. Now, I had my mansion by the sea, my privacy, my solitude. What more could a man need? I lived alone, a life of quiet routine. The house was large, maybe too large for just one person, but I liked it that way. It was my sanctuary. I had no need for the noise of city life or the constant demands of family. Here I could reflect on the years gone by, on the choices I'd made, and what I'd left behind. I didn't need much. I'd earned my peace, and it was mine to keep. But of course, peace is fragile, and it rarely lasts. That morning, as I sat watching the sun rise over the ocean, my phone rang. The harsh sound of the ringtone broke through the calm, and I felt a slight knot in my stomach. I recognized the number immediately. My son-in-law, a man in his 30s, who had always rubbed me the wrong way. He was brash, entitled, and never seemed to consider how his actions affected others. "Hey, Jeremy," his voice came through, loud and demanding, as usual. "I'm bringing a few friends over. We'll be there in about 40 minutes. I felt the irritation rise in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. "What do you mean, a few friends?" "Oh, just a small group, 15 of us. We're going to crash at your place for a couple of days. See you soon." 15 people. I couldn't believe it. He just assumed he could come to my house, disrupt my life, and that I would be fine with it. There was no asking, no consideration for what I wanted. It was simply, "We're coming, deal with it." A sharp breath escaped me, but I remained calm. "All right," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "I'll see you when you get here." The line went dead before I had a chance to respond further. I could feel the frustration bubbling up inside me, but I forced myself to sit back and think. 15 people. Just like that, my peaceful life was about to be invaded. I didn't have time to react, at least not yet. I needed to think this through. It was clear he didn't respect me, my time, or my boundaries. But I had a plan. I always do. I stood up and made my way toward the kitchen, gathering my thoughts. As I moved through the spacious rooms of the house, I found myself thinking about the years I'd spent building this place, the money, the sweat, the late nights. And for what? So my family could treat me like some kind of glorified hotel. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of tires crunching on gravel outside. They were here. I didn't move to greet them. Instead, I stood by the window, watching as they unloaded their things. The noise grew louder, their laughter, their voices. It was all too much. They were already setting up for a party in my own home, and I was the one left to handle it all. I walked to the guest room, preparing for their arrival, but it wasn't out of any sense of hospitality. I wasn't about to roll out the red carpet. I was preparing for the chance to teach them all a lesson. I pulled out the towels, made sure the beds were ready, but I did something extra. I took my son-in-law's credit card and froze it. I knew it was a small thing, but it would hit him where it hurt. It was my first step in taking control of the situation. As I continued my preparations, a strange sense of satisfaction began to build within me. This wasn't a simple inconvenience. This was a chance to take back some power. They were expecting hospitality. What they would get was a lesson in respect. The doorbell rang and the chaos began. The group of 15 barged through the door, loud and full of energy. They clearly thought they were entitled to my space, and they wasted no time making themselves at home. I could hear their obnoxious chatter, their boisterous laughter, their careless footsteps as they made themselves comfortable, completely oblivious to the tension in the air. I remained calm, watching them from the hallway as they settled in. The sound of their voices was like nails on a chalkboard to me, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I found myself oddly amused, watching them without saying a word. They had no idea what was coming. My son-in-law pulled out his wallet and attempted to pay for a few things they'd brought in, only to be met with an error message. He tried again, frowning, but the same message appeared on the screen. His eyes widened with confusion. "What the hell?" he muttered under his breath, checking his card again. I could see it on his face. He didn't know what had happened, but I did. It was working. I stayed in the background, pretending I hadn't noticed. But inside, I was smirking. I knew he'd eventually realize what had happened, but I wasn't about to make it easy for him. This was just the beginning. Later, as the group continued to settle in, the frustration in my son-in-law's face grew. He tried calling the bank, but they couldn't help. The card was frozen, and he couldn't do a thing about it. I watched him pace around, growing more agitated by the minute. It was all I could do not to laugh. But I didn't. I just waited. I knew this was far from over. As the night wore on, I couldn't help but reflect on what was happening. I'd spent years being the one who always gave, always put others first, but now it was my turn. This was my house, my rules. And it felt damn good to finally take control. But I knew this was just the beginning. My son-in-law hadn't even begun to realize what he'd unleashed. The storm was coming, and I was ready. The day had only just begun, but I could already feel the tension creeping in. The group of 15 had settled in, but they weren't the quiet, respectful guests I had hoped for. No, they were loud and demanding, and David, the son-in-law, was the ringleader. He made it clear that he expected nothing less than the best, and he wasn't shy about showing his dissatisfaction with what he thought should be provided. I watched him, quietly observing from the shadows as he paced through the house, complaining about everything from the furniture to the lack of amenities. It wasn't just that he was upset, he was angry, entitled, and he wasn't afraid to let everyone know. "I can't believe you don't have better towels," he muttered under his breath as he inspected the guest bathroom. "This place is nice, but I thought it would be more grand." It was as if he was a child who didn't get his way, throwing a tantrum at every corner. But I wasn't about to feed into it. I had been around long enough to know how to handle these situations. I simply stood back, letting him fume while I carried on with my plan, silently savoring the unfolding chaos. As the day wore on, his complaints didn't stop. He demanded more luxury, more comfort, as if he was the one who had worked for it all. I was the one who'd built this house, paid for it with years of hard work, and here he was acting like he was the one entitled to the best. It was a bitter pill, but I kept my composure, letting his anger fester without giving him the satisfaction of a response. With each passing hour, his frustration simmered. I could feel the air growing thick with tension, but for me, it was a delicate pleasure. Every demand, every complaint was part of the plan. He didn't know it yet, but he was playing right into my hands. I watched as David's frustration turned into something more: anxiety. He started asking about the other guests, whether they could have this or that, as though I were a servant to his whims. But instead of responding, I simply nodded or gave brief answers. There was no need to explain myself to him. As the evening approached, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. The day was playing out exactly as I had imagined. His demands were escalating, but so was the tension in the air. And I remained calm, watching from the sidelines. By the time the sun began to set, David was visibly frustrated, but I had yet to say a word of protest. He was losing control, but I was steady, letting the pressure mount. Then, as if to add fuel to the fire, I saw him pull out his credit card to pay for some of the extra expenses. He handed it to the cashier without hesitation, only to be met with an error message. "Come on," he muttered under his breath, swiping the card again. Nothing. The screen stayed frozen, the error flashing bright and clear. He tried again, but still no luck. A low growl escaped his throat, and I watched with quiet amusement as he pulled out his phone to call the bank. His face twisted in confusion as he was put on hold, growing more and more impatient with every passing second. I knew exactly what had happened, but I wasn't about to let him know just yet. The card was frozen, and I had made sure of it. The small satisfaction of watching him struggle was hard to contain, but I kept my poker face on. After what felt like an eternity, David finally hung up, his frustration reaching its peak. "What the hell is going on with my card?" he snapped, loud enough for the whole house to hear. His voice was tinged with panic now, and I couldn't help but relish the moment. He looked at me then, his eyes narrowing. "Did you do something to my card?" I didn't respond right away. Instead, I simply shrugged. "What do you mean?" I asked, feigning innocence. His jaw clenched. "Don't play dumb with me, Jeremy. I know you did something. I can't use my card. What did you do?" I stood still, watching him, my face unreadable. "David, I'm not sure what you mean," I said, keeping my voice calm, controlled. "Maybe you should call the bank again." His anger flared, but he didn't say anything else. He stormed off to call the bank a second time, leaving me to my thoughts. I knew this was just the beginning. As the tension continued to rise, it would only get worse for him. The more he struggled, the more he would lose control, and the more satisfaction I would find in watching it all unfold. The night carried on, the air thick with his frustration, and I, still calm, couldn't help but feel a sense of quiet victory. I was playing my cards carefully, and soon enough he would be forced to face the consequences of his own actions. But for now, I was content to let him stew in his own frustration. The storm was building, and I was ready for it. The tension in the mansion had escalated beyond what I had expected. It wasn't just the noise or the constant demands. It was the sheer entitlement that oozed from David, my son-in-law. I had tried to stay calm, to let the situation unfold, but it was getting harder to keep my composure. The mansion felt smaller with every passing moment. The walls seemed to close in as David grew increasingly irritable, as if the house itself was now a prison for him, a place too grand for someone of his stature, too foreign to the casual, carefree lifestyle he was accustomed to. David's frustration was palpable. He hadn't said much since the credit card incident, but the air was thick with unspoken resentment. His once confident posture had shifted, now stiff and angry, as he constantly compared the mansion to places far more luxurious. "Why isn't the Wi-Fi stronger? Where's the cable TV? How can you live like this?" he muttered under his breath, his voice laced with annoyance. I watched, silent and composed, as he struggled to adjust. His demands had begun to feel like a constant battering, a persistent effort to undermine my authority in my own home. His anger was building up, and I was starting to enjoy the irony of it. He had no idea how far I was willing to let this go. David's entitlement was only matched by his ignorance. He had no idea that my patience was part of the plan. The game had shifted, and every complaint he voiced was another brick in the wall I was building around him. But there was more at stake than just his comfort. It wasn't just about getting him to feel uncomfortable in the space he had invaded. It was about something far deeper. For too long, I had been the family's doormat, the one who bent over backwards to accommodate their whims, to keep the peace. Not anymore. This was my moment to regain control, to show David and everyone else that I wasn't going to tolerate being walked over. As the day wore on, David's frustration only grew. He demanded more luxurious amenities, but I wasn't about to give in. The more he complained, the more I felt in control. He was unraveling, and I was watching him slowly slip into a panic. At one point, he went to the kitchen and began opening cabinets, his irritation mounting as he found nothing that suited his standards. This place could use a renovation, he grumbled, throwing a glance toward me as if I were the one responsible for every flaw he imagined. It was like watching a slow-motion train wreck, and I wasn't about to step in and save him. I was enjoying the spectacle too much. I could see the frustration growing in his eyes. He was feeling trapped, unable to control the situation. I could see how much it irked him that he didn't have the power to dictate the environment like he usually did. The phone call earlier, the one that had set this entire chain of events in motion, still echoed in my mind. He had taken it for granted that his presence was a command, not a request. He had assumed I would open my doors and cater to his every need, but I wasn't about to let that slide. I watched him attempt to regain some control, first by walking over to the living room and pulling out his phone to make a call. He was trying to manipulate the situation, using his connections, no doubt. He probably thought he could call in a favor, get the upper hand somehow. I just watched him unbothered, knowing that none of his usual tricks would work here. He glanced back at me, a look of desperation crossing his face. He was on the phone for what felt like an eternity, pacing the floor, his hands running through his hair. There was nothing left to do. His credit card was frozen, and it was just the beginning. The next thing I knew, David was standing in front of me, his eyes narrowed with anger. "What did you do to my card?" His voice was low but sharp, laced with frustration. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I looked at him with a quiet calmness that seemed to infuriate him even more. "What do you mean?" I asked, feigning confusion, my voice betraying nothing. "You know exactly what I mean. My card isn't working. What did you do?" I paused, letting the silence stretch between us. "Maybe it's just a glitch," I said, my tone still level. "You should call the bank again." His face flushed with rage as he pulled his phone out again, this time frantically dialing the number to his bank. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. He was pacing again, his footfalls heavy, but I stayed seated, calm, letting him stew in his frustration. When he hung up the phone, the look on his face was one of disbelief. "They froze it," he muttered under his breath. "Why the hell would they freeze my card?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The answer was already clear. I had made sure of it. The frustration in his eyes was unmistakable now. It was a mix of confusion, anger, and panic, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction at watching it all unravel. He had expected his usual smooth path, but I had put an obstacle in his way, and now he had to deal with it. His voice rose as he demanded an explanation, but I didn't give him one. I simply let him rage. The more he raged, the more I controlled. His pride, once unshakable, was starting to crack, and I was there to watch it happen. David's desperation became apparent. He had no choice but to confront me directly. But I wasn't going to make it easy for him. I stood my ground, watching him struggle as his usual bravado began to break down. "Why are you doing this to me?" he snapped, his voice harsh. I smiled inside, but didn't let it show on my face. "I'm not doing anything to you, David. You're doing this to yourself." The words hung in the air between us. He didn't know what to do next, and for the first time, I could see that he was genuinely rattled. I had taken the power back, and he had no idea how to regain it. David, in his usual way, started looking for someone else to blame. But the people around him weren't going to help him this time. One by one, his friends started backing off, sensing the shift in the air. They could see the frustration on his face, but they weren't willing to risk getting caught up in it. They were starting to turn on him, and it was beautiful to watch. I stood in the background, letting the chaos unfold. This was only the beginning, and I knew it. The tension had been building all week, and now it was about to break. I could feel it in the air as I watched David's every move. His attempts to regain some sense of control had failed miserably, and I was more than content to let him unravel. The confrontation earlier had cracked something in him, his pride, his sense of superiority. It was all slipping away, and I had a front row seat to the show. David's anger had been building for days, and now it was starting to boil over. Every time he looked at me, I could see the resentment in his eyes. He was trying to deny the reality of the situation, thinking that if he acted like everything was fine, it would somehow fix itself. But deep down, I could tell he knew he was losing. As much as he tried to hide it, his frustration was becoming harder to ignore. It was as if every step he took in the mansion, every glance he cast my way, pushed him closer to a breaking point. His attempts to regain control over the situation were growing more desperate. He was clutching at straws, trying to pull people into his corner, but no one was buying it. His confidence, once so brash and unshakable, was now a distant memory. I, on the other hand, stayed calm. I had seen this kind of desperation before. It was the same kind of panic I had felt when I realized I had let my family walk all over me for too long. But now, I was in control. I was the one calling the shots, and I wasn't about to let him take that from me. As I watched him struggle, I reflected on the situation with a sense of quiet satisfaction. David had pushed me too far, thinking that I would just roll over and give in. Now he was paying the price. I could almost taste the victory. The moments of silence between us were becoming unbearable for him. He needed an outlet, and I knew exactly what he was going to do next. It was only a matter of time before he would confront me again, trying to manipulate the situation in his favor. But he didn't realize that every move he made only pushed him further into my trap. As the hours dragged on, I could see David plotting, scheming, trying to find a way out of this mess. But every time he tried, it felt like I was one step ahead. I had been patient, biding my time, and now it was time for my next move. Then it came. David came to me again, this time more desperate than ever. He tried to call in his family connections, reaching out to others who could help him regain his power. But it was clear to me that his influence was waning. He had no real leverage anymore. His pride was all that was left, and that was slipping through his fingers like sand. "You think you can just play these games with me?" He spat, his voice dripping with venom. "You're ruining everything, Jeremy. This wasn't supposed to be how it went down." I didn't flinch. I remained silent, letting him stew in his anger. I could see the cracks in his armor. He was unraveling, and I was enjoying every second of it. It was a strange feeling, watching him struggle like this. But it wasn't just about the satisfaction of watching him squirm. It was about taking back what was mine. For far too long, I had been the one giving in, the one making sacrifices. Now, it was my turn to take control. David's attempt to regain control had failed spectacularly. His pride was shattered, and there was no coming back from it. I could feel the weight of his frustration, the sense of desperation in his voice as he tried to regain his footing. But every move he made only served to highlight how little power he actually had. He was starting to realize that the game had changed. He had no idea what to do, and that gave me an overwhelming sense of calm. I had anticipated this moment for so long, and now it was here. David had pushed me too far, and there was no going back. The phone call from earlier had been the catalyst. The credit card, the arguments, the tension, it had all led up to this. He had underestimated me, and now he was paying the price. He wanted to lash out, to regain control, but the more he tried, the further he pushed himself away from the power he thought he still held. David's face grew redder as his efforts became more frantic. He was grasping at anything he could to shift the power dynamic back in his favor, but it wasn't working. Not this time. I didn't need to say anything. My silence was enough. It was killing him inside. I could see it in his eyes. He was losing control, and there was nothing he could do about it. His desperation had made him reckless, and he had no idea that every move he made was only digging him deeper into a hole. His emotions were a chaotic mix of anger and fear, and he didn't know how to handle it. Every time he tried to lash out, I calmly deflected him, leaving him with nothing but his shattered pride. The more he tried to assert himself, the more he exposed his vulnerability. Then it happened. David, in a fit of rage, made a rash decision. He accused me of manipulating everything, of controlling the situation from the start. "This was all your plan, wasn't it?" he shouted, his voice trembling with fury. You've been setting me up this whole time, haven't you? I didn't flinch. You're the one who walked into this, David, I said calmly. I didn't ask for this, but now that it's happening, you're the one who's out of control. David's anger flared as he stepped forward, his face inches from mine, but I didn't back down. You think you can intimidate me? You think you can control me the way you've controlled everyone else? I asked. You're wrong. I watched as David's face drained of color. His entire demeanor crumbled in that moment. I had exposed him, his pride shattered in front of everyone, but it wasn't over yet. David's desperation reached new heights. He tried to strike one final blow, something that could potentially ruin my reputation, destroy everything I had worked for. His words were like a knife, sharp and cutting. I'll tell everyone about your past, he threatened. I'll make sure everyone knows what you really are. But I wasn't afraid. I think you'll find, I said, that your threats don't scare me anymore. David paused, as if realizing too late that his words held no weight. His last-ditch effort to regain power had backfired, and now he was the one standing in the ruins of his own pride. I had won. But even as I stood there knowing that I had taken control, I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The mansion, once a sanctuary of peace, now felt like a pressure cooker, the tension simmering beneath the surface. I had seen it coming, the growing hostility, the escalating frustration, but I hadn't expected it to unfold so quickly. Each day, David's attempts to reassert himself grew more desperate. He was spinning in circles, trying to take back control, but the harder he pushed, the more he sank. I watched him closely, noting the small signs of his unraveling, the clenched jaw, the stiff shoulders, the little outbursts that now peppered his speech. I knew it wouldn't be long before he cracked entirely, but I wasn't in a hurry. I had learned the art of patience over the years, and this was a game I intended to win, one calculated move at a time. David, on the other hand, was becoming more erratic with each passing hour. His usual cocky demeanor was slipping, revealing a man who had never known real struggle, a man whose world had always bent to his will. But that was no longer the case, and it was obvious he was struggling to accept it. As the days passed, I remained calm, carefully observing him. Every time he came to me with a demand or a complaint, I let him say his piece, then offered a measured response. Never too aggressive, never too passive, always maintaining the upper hand. I could see it in his eyes, the confusion, the realization that his usual methods weren't working. What he didn't know was that I had already decided. I had been watching him make mistake after mistake, each one pulling him further into my web. He had no idea that his every move played into my hands, just like a chess piece falling into place. He was blind to the fact that I had already won. I didn't need to make a grand gesture. No, the quiet moments, the silence between our words were where I'd win this battle. Every time he spoke, every time he pushed, I simply watched, and that in itself was enough. He was digging his own grave, and I was content to let him do it. But as the days went on, I could feel it. The moment of clarity was approaching. The tipping point was near. I had already made my move, setting everything in motion. Now it was time for him to make his. David, in his usual overconfidence, tried once more to push me. This time he called in reinforcements, people who might sway the situation in his favor, but he failed to realize that his influence was slipping, and no one was buying what he was selling anymore. His attempts to rally the troops fell flat. There was no one left to help him. I watched as he made his bold but poorly calculated move. He went to his friends, trying to paint me as the villain, trying to shift the blame for everything that had gone wrong. But it only backfired. His friends weren't as loyal as he thought. They saw through him, saw the desperation in his eyes. They weren't stupid. They knew who the real threat was, and they weren't willing to be dragged down with him. David didn't realize it, but he had made a grave mistake. His attempt to pit others against me had only made him look weaker, more pathetic. As I watched him scramble, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. This was it. This was the moment where everything changed. He came to me again, more desperate than before. His face was flushed, his hands shaking as he tried to play his final card. "You don't get it, Jeremy!" He spat, his voice filled with venom. "You think you've won, but you haven't. You're nothing. I'm still in charge." I met his gaze with a calm that only infuriated him more. "Are you?" I asked, my voice steady, my eyes unflinching. "Because right now you look like someone who's completely out of control." The words stung him. I could see it in his eyes. He was desperate to hold on to his pride, but it was slipping away, piece by piece. And I wasn't about to make it easy for him. As the argument continued, his anger reached a boiling point. He started to lash out, accusing me of manipulating everything, of ruining his life. His words were full of heat, but they didn't faze me. I had heard it all before. What he didn't understand was that his anger was the last thing that would help him. I leaned in, my voice low and deliberate. "David, you've been playing a game you don't understand. You think you're in control, but you're not. You've never been in control." His face went pale. For the first time, he saw the truth. His pride, his arrogance, his belief that he could always get what he wanted. It was all coming to an end. The tables had turned, and he was the one who had been played. But even as he stood there, vulnerable and defeated, he wasn't done yet. David wasn't ready to accept defeat. His pride was too big, and he made one last attempt to regain some control. He threatened me with something personal, something he thought would tear me down. His words were sharp, aimed directly at my weaknesses. He thought he had found my Achilles heel, the one thing that would shatter my calm composure. But it didn't work. His threat fell flat, and I simply looked at him, unshaken. "You think that will hurt me?" I asked, my voice almost amused. "David, you've already shown your hand. There's nothing left." He had no response. His final attempt to regain control had failed. The power had shifted, and there was no going back. As the day wore on, I could see it in his eyes. He had lost. He was defeated, but he wouldn't admit it. Not yet. And that, I realized, was the most dangerous part of all. Because when a man like David is backed into a corner, there's no telling what he'll do next. But for now, the game was over. And I had won. The tension in the mansion had reached a breaking point. Every move David made only seemed to tighten the noose around his neck, yet he was still blind to it. He continued to push, overestimating his position, convinced that he could still force me into submission. What he didn't realize was that every word he spoke, every action he took, was simply digging his own grave deeper. I stood calm in the eye of the storm, biding my time. His frustration was becoming increasingly palpable, and I could feel a quiet sense of power building within me. The more he struggled, the more he unknowingly played into my hands. I had seen this before. People like David, overconfident and sure of themselves, unable to see the downfall coming until it was too late. He had tried to rally support, pulling in others to his side, thinking that numbers or alliances could sway the outcome. But he was wrong. What he failed to understand was that I didn't need a crowd to win. I only needed patience and precision, and with every desperate move he made, the game tilted further in my favor. David was beginning to crack under the weight of his arrogance. He attempted to play his cards, threatening, manipulating, trying to scare me into submission. But I remained calm. His words fell flat. His actions were fruitless. I saw the cracks in his facade. His overconfidence was his greatest weakness. I could feel the turning point approaching. The stage had been set, and I was ready to make my move. The power struggle had escalated, but it was now my turn to take control. He was vulnerable, and I knew the moment was near. David, in a last-ditch effort, tried to force the issue. He made his play, thinking it would corner me, bring me to my knees. But his move was clumsy, a desperate attempt to regain control that only made him look foolish. He called in his allies, tried to bully me with his supposed connections, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I watched him unravel. His desperation grew, and with every failed attempt, he became more agitated, more desperate. It was a trap, and he didn't even see it. The more he pushed, the more he exposed his weaknesses. Each mistake made it clearer to everyone around him. He was losing. Then it came, the moment I had been waiting for. He confronted me once again, more furious than ever, accusing me of everything from manipulating his family to orchestrating his failure. His words were laced with anger, but I remained unshaken. I simply listened, watching him flail, his pride cracking with every accusation. When he finished, I finally spoke. "David, you're angry, but you're not in control. You've never been. The truth is, you were always the one being played. And now, you've finally realized it too late." His eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt. He was speechless, momentarily caught off guard by my calm demeanor. But that was only the beginning. I wasn't done yet. With a slow, deliberate motion, I revealed something he hadn't anticipated, something he had overlooked in his haste to push me. It was a key piece of information, something I had been holding on to, waiting for the right moment. It changed everything. David's face turned pale as the revelation hit him. He had underestimated me, miscalculated my next move. The power had shifted, and he knew it. His anger, his desperation, everything he had tried to manipulate now felt meaningless. The room grew heavier as silence followed. David stood there, defeated, trying to salvage whatever was left of his dignity. But it was over. I had won. His last-ditch attempt to salvage his position came in the form of a personal attack. He thought he could hurt me, expose my vulnerabilities, make me back down. But I had anticipated this. His words, intended to wound, only solidified my control. "You're making a mistake, David," I said calmly. Your threats don't mean anything now. You've lost, and you know it." His final act of defiance failed miserably. He was done. His position, his pride, everything he had tried to hold on to was gone. I had no need to fight with him any longer. He had already defeated himself. As the dust settled, I took a moment to reflect. I had played my hand with precision, every move calculated, every word delivered with purpose. And yet there was no joy in this victory. The cost had been high, and the damage had been done. But for now, I had won. David had nothing left. But there was still something lingering in the back of my mind, a sense that this wasn't the end. The war might be over, but the battle was far from won. The story wasn't finished, and I knew that the fallout from all of this would echo far beyond these walls. David, for all his bravado, was now facing the consequences of his actions. He had lost control, and the repercussions would be his to bear. But there was a small part of me that felt something else. Regret, perhaps. It was a bitter victory, one that would change things forever. As I stood there, I knew that the full weight of everything was yet to come. The future was uncertain, but for now, I had my victory, and that would have to be enough. The weight of everything was starting to settle in. I stood there, in the middle of the storm, fully aware of how much I had already lost, but also knowing that I couldn't turn back. David was relentless, pushing harder with every passing moment, using any leverage he had left. Yet, no matter how hard he tried, his grasp on control was slipping away. I could feel the pressure mounting, but strangely, it didn't feel like defeat. It felt like the calm before the storm. I had fought for years to build what I had, and now it was a fight to preserve it. David, blinded by his desperation, was making mistakes, his every move more aggressive and reckless. For a moment, I couldn't help but question if it was all worth it. My decisions, my quiet retaliation, what had it cost me? Had I gone too far? A flicker of doubt crept in, but I quickly brushed it away. I had to stand my ground. There was no other choice. The price I had paid wasn't just measured in time or effort, but in the relationships I'd lost, the trust I'd shattered. I thought back to a pivotal moment, something that haunted me, a time when I had been wronged. a moment where I had been silenced by my own choices. It was almost a mirror of where I was now. I had been pushed to the edge then, just like David was now. But the difference was, I was not going to bend this time. I had learned, and I had grown. This was my moment to make things right, even if it meant pushing David to his own breaking point. The reality of the situation hit me hard. David, in his panic, had started lashing out in ways I had not expected. Desperate, he tried to manipulate those around us, pulling in favors, using every weapon at his disposal. But none of it worked. He was flailing, and I was watching him drown in his own desperation. And then he made his final desperate move. He tried to blackmail me. It was as if he thought that because he had a few secrets of his own, he could shake me. He thought he could use them as leverage, twisting the truth until it was unrecognizable. But what he didn't know was that I had been preparing for this moment. Every word he threw at me only made the trap tighter. I didn't flinch. I stayed silent, calm. He expected me to react, to show weakness, but I remained in control. His anger grew, the cracks in his facade deepening with each failed attempt to manipulate the situation. It was almost poetic. David had underestimated me, and now he was paying for it. He went too far. In the heat of our confrontation, I used his own words against him. I revealed something he hadn't seen coming, something that exposed his true nature. His face drained of color as the truth hit him harder than any of my words could. David's strength had always been his confidence, but that confidence had led him to make critical miscalculations. He thought he had power because he had information, but all I needed was silence. My quiet strength broke him down, piece by piece. The tipping point had come. I saw his final attempt to salvage something from this mess. He tried to play the victim, accusing me of manipulating him, of orchestrating everything. His voice trembled, his pride wounded. But it was too late. I had already won. There was nothing left for him to stand on. I had not spoken a word of anger, nor had I raised my voice. My silence was more powerful than anything he could throw at me. And that, I realized, was the real victory. The battle had never been about proving myself. It had been about reclaiming my power, and I had done it with quiet precision. David was done. There was no coming back from this. His desperation had torn down the walls he had built around himself, leaving him vulnerable and exposed. He had no more moves, no more cards to play. And yet, as the dust settled, a strange feeling washed over me. It was a hollow victory. Yes, I had reclaimed my life, my space, my dignity, but at what cost? The emotional scars, those wouldn't go away. The toll this had taken on me was heavy, far heavier than any of the consequences David now faced. He would deal with the aftermath of his actions, but me? I had to live with the realization that I'd gone too far in some ways. That maybe, just maybe, I had become someone I never thought I would be. The victory felt bittersweet, like swallowing a pill you knew you needed but never wanted to take. But as I looked back at David, crumpled in front of me, I knew that he would never again have the power to make me feel small, and that was worth something. But what was coming next? That was still uncertain. The aftermath of this wasn't over. There were more battles ahead, within myself, with those around me. But for now, David had lost, and I had gained a small measure of peace. The weight of the coming storm was palpable. I could feel it pressing in on me, even as I stood in the stillness of my thoughts. The final confrontation was drawing closer, and while I had prepared for it mentally and physically, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something might go wrong. There were so many variables, so many possible outcomes, but one thing was clear. It was time to settle things once and for all. David had pushed me to the edge, and now it was my turn. Every move I made from here on out would be decisive. No more hesitation. The stakes were high, and I couldn't afford to lose. I had spent days, weeks, even months contemplating how to bring this to a close. Every strategy, every word, every action had been meticulously planned. There would be no room for error. Yet, just as I thought I was ready, an unexpected message arrived. It was from an old acquaintance, someone I hadn't heard from in years. Their words were cryptic but enough to make my pulse quicken. A revelation, a reminder of things I thought were long buried, brought back to the surface. Could it be that I wasn't as in control as I thought? The message lingered in my mind like an itch I couldn't scratch. Despite this new twist, my resolve didn't waver. I knew what I had to do. But now, I also knew that the consequences of this confrontation would reach beyond just David and me. The lives of those around us were entwined in this mess. The battle was no longer only about me reclaiming my space, it was about ensuring that the truth came to light, no matter who got hurt in the process. The tension built as I prepared for what was to come. My mind raced through the evidence I had collected, the details I had tucked away for just this moment. David wouldn't know what hit him. The calmness of my planning contrasted sharply with the chaos unfolding around me. His desperation was palpable, and I could see it in his eyes. But then, just as I thought I had him cornered, something unexpected happened. A family member, someone I hadn't expected to side with David, did just that. The betrayal hit me like a punch to the gut. My plans, so carefully laid out, suddenly felt fragile. This wasn't just about David anymore. The stakes had shifted. I had to reconsider everything. Could I still trust the people I'd been fighting for? Was this whole battle worth the toll it was taking on us all? With every move I made, every conversation I had, David became more frantic. His attempts to manipulate the situation only revealed how weak his position truly was. His plan had always been to use fear and power to control the narrative. But now I had control, and I would use it to expose every lie, every hidden agenda. The confrontation, when it finally came, was inevitable. I walked into the room, my mind sharp, my resolve steeled. David's face twisted with anger as soon as he saw me. Words flew between us like daggers. He accused me of orchestrating his downfall, of manipulating everyone around him. But his words fell flat like hollow echoes in a room that had already been emptied of their meaning. The battle of wits reached its climax when I revealed the truth that he had been hiding all these years. A betrayal, one that I had uncovered years ago, but had kept in my back pocket for just this moment. It was a final, devastating blow. David's face went pale, his eyes darting around as if looking for some way to undo the damage. But it was too late. I had won. But the victory was not as sweet as I had imagined. David's empire of lies, manipulation, and power began to crumble before my eyes, and as much as I wanted to savor the moment, there was a part of me that felt the weight of the cost. It was over, yes, but at what price? David, now exposed for who he truly was, made one last desperate attempt to save face. His final act of defiance was a public spectacle, something that he thought would redeem him. But instead, it only revealed the full extent of his deceit. The fallout was immediate, spreading like wildfire. People saw him for what he was, and the damage to his reputation was irreversible. But even with his fall from grace, I didn't feel the satisfaction I expected. I had won, yes, but the emotional toll of this entire battle, the lies, the manipulation, it had all taken something from me. My victory was bittersweet, like holding onto something that burned my hands. As I stood there watching David crumble in front of me, I was faced with a decision. The final choice. Did I completely dismantle him, leaving no room for redemption? Or did I allow him a sliver of dignity, a chance at redemption, despite everything he had done? I looked at him, the man who had pushed me to the brink, the man who had cost me so much. The decision weighed on me like a stone in my chest. I had come this far, but the journey was far from over. There would be no easy answers, no simple resolutions. In the end, I made my choice. It wasn't about mercy. It was about ensuring that my actions aligned with the person I wanted to be. And so, I left the battlefield, knowing that my victory had come at a price. The fight for justice had cost me more than I had anticipated, but it had also set me free. As I stepped away from the wreckage of the battle, I looked ahead. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt confident in my ability to face whatever came next. I had learned, I had grown, and I knew that the fight within me wasn't over. I stood there on the precipice of something bigger than myself. The past few months, maybe even years, had led me to this moment. The turmoil with David, the emotional upheaval, the betrayal, the endless fight for power, it was all coming to an end. But even as I stood there, feeling the quiet before the storm, I knew this wasn't just the end of a battle. It was the beginning of something else. There was a weight to it. The finality of it all was bearing down on me. The family was divided, the damage done, and the ties that once held us together seemed so fragile now. I couldn't help but reflect on everything I had been through. Every argument, every harsh word, every broken trust, the sacrifices made, the bridges burned. It all led to this. I couldn't go back now, not after everything. But I had to admit there was a sense of peace beginning to settle within me. Even if the storm wasn't truly over, at least I knew I had fought my fight. But then, as I stood there in that moment of stillness, the unexpected came, a letter. It wasn't just any letter, it was a message, cryptic but powerful. The words on that paper sent a chill down my spine. Could this be the twist I hadn't seen coming? The revelation that would change everything once again? For a brief moment, my heart skipped a beat, but I shoved it aside. Whatever was in that letter, I would deal with it, just like everything else. I wasn't going to let it throw me off course now. David was waiting, and the confrontation was inevitable. It had to happen, and it had to happen now. As I prepared for this final showdown, I could feel the heaviness of the moment, the emotional toll of everything I'd been through, the manipulation, the lies, the games. It was all coming crashing down. And now it was time for David to face the consequences of his actions. But as I steeled myself for what was coming, a new layer of uncertainty began to form. What was I really hoping for here? Was it truly justice? Or was there something more, something deeper at play? The pacing of my thoughts quickened as the day of the final confrontation drew closer. I gathered all the evidence, all the ammunition I needed to bring this to an end. No more second chances, no more hesitation. I would confront him, and I would expose every lie. But as the tension built, I found myself faced with another unexpected turn. A family member, someone close to me, stepped forward, taking David's side. The betrayal hit me like a slap across the face. It made everything harder. Everything was suddenly more complicated. What was once clear now felt clouded by the weight of this new alliance. This wasn't just about David anymore. It was about more than that. I pushed the feeling aside and forced myself to stay focused. I wasn't about to let this derail me. I had made up my mind. The confrontation would happen, and I would see it through. I would expose the truth no matter what. When the time finally came, there was no more holding back. The words came out of me like a flood, cutting through the air. I confronted David with everything I had been holding back for so long. The lies, the manipulation, it all spilled out. I didn't care about his protests. I didn't care about his deflection. I needed him to hear it, to understand that the power he once held over me was gone. This was no longer about him trying to control the narrative. It was about me taking back my life. But just when I thought I had him cornered, when everything seemed to be going according to plan, he hit me with a bombshell, something from the past, something I didn't expect. The revelation rocked me, threw me off balance for a moment. My emotions surged, but I couldn't let him see it. He had done this before, thrown me off course with his games, but I wouldn't let him do it again. I took a deep breath, regained my footing, and pressed on. It wasn't just about what he said. It was about what I had to say, about what had been building inside me for so long. The anger, the frustration, the betrayal, it all poured out, but it was controlled, calculated. I wasn't going to let him win. Not now. Not ever. The words flew between us, sharp and biting. The tension in the room was unbearable. But just as I thought the battle was reaching its peak, something unexpected happened. An ally, someone I hadn't anticipated, stepped forward, offering crucial support. The shift in momentum was instant. David, who had been so sure of himself, suddenly faltered. I took advantage of it, pushing him further into the corner, revealing the full extent of his lies. When it was all over, when the dust began to settle, I realized that the victory was not as sweet as I had imagined. David's empire, built on lies and manipulation, began to crumble. He was exposed for what he truly was. And while part of me felt relief, another part of me felt something else, a deep, lingering sadness. The cost of this battle had been high, and even though I had won, it felt like there were no true winners here. David, now crumbling, made one last desperate attempt to salvage what was left of his pride. But it was too late. The truth had already come out. His reputation, once solid, was in ruins. And I knew deep down that this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about me, about my family, and what we had all been through. But even as his power evaporated, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. The emotional toll was too great. The scars, the betrayals. These things didn't just disappear with one final confrontation. I had won, but there was no real closure. There were still so many questions left unanswered, so many pieces of the puzzle still missing. As I stood there, looking at the wreckage of everything, I was faced with a choice. Could I move on from this? Could I truly let go of the past, or would it haunt me forever? I had to decide. And as much as I wanted to move on, to heal, there was something deep inside that told me the fight wasn't really over. Not yet. And so I walked away, leaving the past behind, but carrying its weight with me. I was ready to face whatever came next. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could handle it. But as I took that first step forward, I couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle, the one that would define me, was just beginning.